Welcome to Unity and Diversity. I'm John Smith, and I'm your host. This show is sponsored by the Baha'is of Memphis and Shelby County, and today we're going to have a very exciting show. We're going to talk about unity and diversity, but this time in a different manner. This time it's going to be how unity is related to people, unity of people. And today I would like to welcome my guest to the show, Diana Chambers, geneticist from the University of Tennessee. Welcome, Diana.
Hi, John. Nice to be
And
back.
also my guest, Dr. Paul Herron,
Hi, John.
Doctor of Neuroscience, also from the University of Tennessee. Okay, guys, I'm certainly glad you could come because I've got a lot of questions that we, the audience, would like to know. First, people, who are we? Where did we come from? Is there any unity? Or are we just a scattered mass of humanity floating around the planet? First of all, let's see. I'll open up asking Diana, who are we?
Well, for those of you who believe in evolution, we've been around a long, long time. Man is a being who is very much part of this planet. If you look at what he's made of and his cells and the material out of which he's built, we are part of every animal that's on this planet, the bacteria, the bugs, the plants. I mean, the elements of which we're composed are the same as, you know, the trees, the birds, the fish in the sea. We recycle. Maybe the chemical compounds in me have been around 1 million years ago in recycling. So we are part of this planet. This is an ecosystem that we all belong to. Is that what you want to know?
Okay, well, yeah, basically, but we come from different parts of the world. As we relate to people, there are people in Asia, there are people in Africa, there are people, let's see, Malaysia, that would probably be part of Asia, yeah. And Scandinavian, so we're a wide variety of people.
Well, mankind as a beast that stands on 2 legs and uses his hands and his mind probably started somewhere around about 5-odd million years ago, and I think a lot of archaeologists and anthropologists are going to give you some discussion on the precise timing, and I'm not one of them, but probably from somewhere in Africa, and then as they multiplied in numbers, they just spread out across the globe, from Africa out into Asia and across Europe, and then across the Bering Straits into America and down through the continents. And they just walked, you know, they found a good source of hunting or a nice valley and good source of water, they would just follow it, and mankind just spread out and then adapted to where he was.
Okay, Paul?
One of the interesting aspects of the questions that you asked is that there are a lot of, just a tremendous variety of people, different colors, different sizes, but particularly the colors. And sometimes we think that colors of people makes people different, whereas if you actually look at the histology, the tissue that makes up the skin, you will find that all skin is the same, and that what makes people with slightly different colors have slightly different pigments in their skin. But everybody has the potential to make those pigments. What brings it to the fore in some people is the climate. I mean, for example, in Africa, where the climate was very hot, the sun was a condition which made the skin develop pigmentation to prevent harmful burns to the skin. Whereas if you compare the people from Africa with those, say, in northern Europe, you'll find that in northern Europe, the weather conditions, the climate was such that pigmentation was not a necessity. In fact, the need for as much sun as possible eliminated the need to sort of develop this pigmentation. So you find in different parts of the world, people have adapted to the climate conditions in which they live in, and in the process of adapting to these conditions, they've sort of developed different colors, different hairstyles, different kinds of hair, and which leads to the variety, I think, in humankind.
Okay, well, certainly we're talking about diversity. Why are certain concepts that certain people are smarter than other people sort of intrinsically smarter, if I can use that term. Maybe the shape of their head denotes intelligence. We're a variety of people, and we are various and diverse. So is people with a large frontal lobe smarter than people with a more inclined frontal lobe? Is this not true?
Well, about 100 years ago, there was a science developed around this idea that you could look at someone and determine what their mental faculties were.
Well, they had machines that kind of measured the bumps on your head.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And you could, someone with, say, a bump here had a certain, was endowed with a certain intelligence to do, say, math. Someone with a bump here was endowed with an intelligence to do music or art or something like that. But the idea being that if the shape of your head determined what kinds of mental faculties that you had. Well, that was proven not to be the case. That the brain is an integrated mechanism, and it isn't what you look like that makes you what you are, but it's really what's in your heart, along with what's in your brain.
Well, are you saying that a smaller, okay, let's take mammals for an example.
Mm-hmm.
A mammal with a very small head would be more intelligent than one with a large head?
Well, I had a professor who used to say to me, he says, if they are still around, that means that they're very smart. I mean, they have something going for them. And as Jennifer was saying, if you survive through these millions and millions of years, you have something going for you. But to get directly to your question, that animal with the small brain has certain faculties, certain potentials, certain intelligence, if you will, that the animal with the large brain doesn't. They're different, but they're different in a way that makes the animal with the small brain do just as well in his habitat as the animal in the large brain does in his habitat. So we can't really say, particularly two very different kinds of animals. If you bring this back to humans, brain size is one which is often discussed and related to intelligence, but no one has really been able to show that you can go around the city of Memphis, for example, and find all the large-headed people, and you will find that they are smarter, or they are in the best occupations, or they are less or more of anything than those with the small head. Now, there's a certain limit. For example, if a baby is exposed to alcohol in the womb or drugs, that leads to a smaller brain size and oftentimes to retardation. But for normal, I'm talking about for normal development.
But that's not entirely just a factor of size. It's also a factor of the organization that goes on inside.
That's true.
Because if you were to take the brain and the cortex and the white and gray matter and what we use of it, we probably use 20% of our mental capacity. So that we actually have a vast amount of use that we could put our brain cells and neurons and matrices to, which we don't do. But if you actually damage it so that the connections and the maturation of the nerves is damaged, like Paul was just saying, you know, if a baby is exposed to some kind of drugs or alcohol, or, you know, even an adult over a prolonged period of years can damage their liver or other parts of their body, then that can destroy the tissue and you can't use it. But in terms of actual capacity, you know, to look at it from the genetic point of view, the human has a range of normality that probably goes from around about an IQ of, say, 50, 60 some, right through to 100 plus. And that is the normal range. And a person who has an identical sized brain and an identical coordination and normal development can be anywhere in that range, depending on what his genes and those of his parents say he will be.
Okay, well, just before I get too deep into that, I want to get you guys on opposite sides of the fence. So let's talk about. Okay, if we're people, as you say, then why can't we live together? Why is it that we're, pardon me, in strife? Why is it that we can't get along? We can't live in unity and harmony? Why is that? What makes one person just hate another person?
Which side of the fence you want to be on?
I think it's very difficult for us to be on the opposite side of the fence of this.
Yeah. Because I think so much of that is cultural. It doesn't have anything to do with the genes or the body structure or what we are as a species. It's very much the way you're brought up and the prejudices, which are mental. And that's an applied thing that's added on during your childhood years and during your adult years. And I know you from neuroscience. I mean, if you were given the brain of a madman or a mass murderer or Einstein, you probably couldn't tell the difference.
No, it's oftentimes, sometimes you can. Sometimes there are abnormalities in certain parts of the brain that we know leads to aggression or something like that, that sometimes causes some of these outrages or behavior. But, you know, as a neuroscientist, and when you bring up the question of why can't we live together, and the excellent point you made about the development, growing up in a situation in which we are taught differently than, say, hate or dislike or hostility toward others. Now, one might say, well, how does that relate to neuroscience? Well, it's a fact that when you are stimulated with environmental cues, environmental factors, or no matter what it is, we tend to be able to adapt, and our brain develop more and better as a result of being stimulated with those. Now, we can extend that, or we can extrapolate that to, say, cultural sort of things. When we are brought up in an environment in which diversity is encouraged, respect for other people is discussed, and the whole subject is discussed in a very positive manner, then I think it's impossible for someone to grow up hating those people which they know a lot about and which they have had stimulating interactions with.
Okay, well, how do you account for the fact that people can grow up in the same city? Okay, we're talking about culturally, say, take any city, USA, where you've got people of black skins and white skins growing up in the very same city, and at the same time, they can't get along or they won't get along. What's the reasoning behind this? What would cause the two of us?
A lot of it is self-imposed isolation.
Isolation? What do you mean?
Self-imposed isolation in the sense that developmentally, we do not prepare situation or expose our kids to a situation where they interact with different groups of people, or people other than themselves. And I think part of this comes from, again, the issue of, well, people who do not have the same color skin, or people who do not have the same accent or whatever, are different people than I, and we just got through discussing that we are basically all the same people, all the same type of people. So one issue is that isolation, which does not allow us to, as we grow up, developmentally, be exposed to other groups in Memphis in a positive, interacting way, in a stimulating way. Now, stimulating is important because if you're not stimulated, then you don't develop in a, you sort of you stagnate.
Okay.
Also, this kind of mixing has to be very much in the home, in the neighborhood. You know, just meeting at school is probably not enough, because then when you go home, you cook differently, or you watch different TV programs, or, you know, you have a totally different lifestyle, separate. You actually have to meet on a very friendly basis. And then you get to know people, and there are no frightening differences. The lack of knowledge is a lot of what makes people reserved with each other, and that can lead to a distancing and a fear, which is silly because we speak the same language, and if you were to take our skin and our hair off, you would not be able to tell. Well, I'm sure a scientist could tell the difference between a male and a female, but in all other respects, under the skin, we're identical.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just pause here for a moment, and we'll continue this, and we'll be right back in a minute. So stay tuned and come right back. Thank you.
If you stop and think of all we have and all our natural beauty, you know how bright it should be showing. It's so sweet that just to take it all for granted, failing to recognize what each one has to give. Hand in hand, we can make it. Hand in hand, we'll make it through the year. With love to light our way, working together every day. I know we can make it hand in hand. Hand in hand. In spite of all these things we have, you know we should remember our greatest asset is our people.
And once we realize that we all need each other, we can go anywhere. For us, there is
Welcome back to Unity and Diversity. My guest today is Dinah Chambers from the University of Tennessee. She's a geneticist, and also Dr. Paul Herron, who is a neuroscientist also from the University of Tennessee. And as we left off, we were talking about the differences in the people and why we can't get along and some of the myths that are out there. So I want to talk about more scientifically about genetics, for an example. Who are we genetically, Diana?
Well, genetically, we're a combination of what our parents give us. We were talking earlier about the varieties of skin colors, and like one of the myths that people say is, if I rub against you, is the color going to come off? And silly things like that, which are actually, you know, deeply ingrained. And we were asking about how color is inherited, and how can we be so many different varieties of colors. Paul mentioned earlier that there are different types of color cells, and you inherit a bunch of them from each parent. So you can have a parent who has a lot of brown color cells and another parent who has perhaps a mixture of brown and yellow or orange color cells. And then it depends on how much he gives you of each of these. If you get very few brown and perhaps a few orangey color, then you would have more like a Spanish or an olive colored skin. Or if you got no yellow or red, but you got a few brown, then you'd be more my color. You'd be a creamy kind of color. And the only difference between me and Paul is that I have very few brown cells, and he has an enormous number of brown melanocytes in his skin. And that's a factor of how many his parents had to give him and how many my parents had to give me. So it's kind of like either mixing two pots of ink or mixing two bowls of beans together and stirring them around and seeing what you have, and then making a grab for this bowl of beans and just seeing how many, you know, creamy color or darker color you have for a child.
So it's all about chance, in other words.
Very much about chance. Yeah.
In other words, you and Paul both have the same color cells, some of the same. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Although
he just has more of them than I do.
Well, what is it that you have more than she has, Paul? Besides what's obvious.
Well, we have the same kind of cell that makes the pigment for my skin, that makes my skin brown. She has those same cells. And so we all have the same exactly, I wouldn't say exactly, but very much the same kind of cells.
Yeah, well, for instance, both of you would have a gene for curly hair, and I don't. My hair genes are straight. you have dark genes in your hair and I have red genes in my hair, red color in my hair. It's rather like if you have a pile of marbles and you just kind of scatter them on the floor, most of them will be in a heap in the middle, and then there'll be some tailed out on each end, and this is the average mass of medium creamy brown humanity, and then you have those down this end which are perhaps more golden yellow skinned, and people out on this end which are more red skinned, and people out the other end of this symmetrical pile which are more dark skinned. It's just a factor of how the colors fall in the pattern as to where you are, you know, in terms of your color.
Okay.
And
Well, excuse me, go right ahead, Paul.
that's really an excellent explanation of the genetic distribution of the color pool, as we will call it. And I teach a course in histology, and particularly I talk about the skin, and we talk about what the skin is made of, and it's made of a variety of cells. Now, if I look at Diane's skin, she has the same kinds of cells in her skin as I do mine. I have a pigment. Her discussion about the colors. I have cells in the cells in my skin make this pigment. And talking earlier about my ancestors coming from Africa where it was very hot and so forth, that was made to really as a protection against the sun. She has that same kind of cell in her skin, but it does not. It makes the precursor for this pigment, but it never sort of fully develops into a full-blown pigment. So she has the same cell there, but it doesn't make as much pigment as mine make. In fact, when she goes into the sun, if Diane goes into the sun,
yeah, you could. I don't think if you catch Paul, but nevertheless, what you're saying is that all people, the cells are basically the same except for the outer coloring, melanin.
For the expression of it.
The expression of the
pigment, pigmentation, or the
All right, then.
And so if she goes out and get a suntan,
right,
that pigment is expressed.
Okay, so the myth there is that sometimes people think that there's one particular skin color that's superior to the other, or one particular race that's superior to the other. But as I'm reading it here, we're talking about unity and also in diversity. Okay, we're one human species, although we are diverse. I remember there is a certain story, I don't know, I'd say certain facts in some quarters anyway, that we're all from one tree anyway. I mean, they said that Adam and Eve were the first two people. And if Adam and Eve were the first two people, then that would mean that somewhere along the line, you and Diana would be related then.
Oh, I'm sure. Every human on the planet is related in a way, because if you were to take the genes of widely different people, say you're taking a nice variable like blood, you know, there are a large number of different blood types around in the human race, but they all do the same function. And if you actually look at the ribbon of DNA that codes for those genes and codes for those variations, the vast majority of that gene will be identical throughout every human being, and there'll just be the occasional sporadic change or mutation in the length of that gives you, say, A type and me B type or whatever, but the basic hemoglobin gene would be identical. I mean, we have to have a functioning gene or we couldn't be alive. And so therefore all of the human race has in fact very minimal changes in their genes. And we can do a test and we can say that you have a certain tissue type, or that I have a certain tissue type, but that's a very, very subtle difference in all intents and purposes. All of our organs, if I was to have a heart transplant or a kidney transplant, I could take it from anybody, from the studio crew, from you. It wouldn't matter, because all of human tissue is compatible with the rest of the human species within small limits. So when you get past looking at the genes for curly hair or eye color, or for how much intelligence a person has or has not got by random chance from his parent, Underneath that, we
Okay.
essentially have,
So-
you know, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and
Okay.
everything else that
Well,
works.
is there any truth to the fact that certain races of people are superior by any particular aspect of their being makes them superior? Is anybody superior to anybody else? If so, what makes them superior?
In what capacity? Paul can probably withstand the heat better. He has more sweat glands than I do. But
Intelligence-wise.
I can withstand the cold better, not only because I'm a woman and I've got more weight on me. But
What about intelligence?
I don't know, we're both at
Yeah.
the university.
I mean, it's people around the world. We're talking, you know, unity of people.
That's really a controversial issue in the sense that when we talk about hereditary genetics and genes and those sort of things, and we talk about hair color, we talk about skin color, which has that strong genetic component, we often make the fatal leap, I think, into genes and intelligence, as if our intelligence is fixed by our genetic inheritance.
Okay, quickly, what determines intelligence?
Well, genes are certainly a factor, and no
Okay.
one really dispute that. But I think of it as sort of the rubber band theory, that the genes, the genetic information we inherit, gives us a certain amount of potential, like a rubber band that can stretch,
Okay.
just not quite stretch. The environment, our stimulation and our improvement can actually, and our
Okay.
training can
Well,
actually
All right.
stretch
So,
that.
drawing it up, I could say that people are people, and there is some unity between us. And we should
absolutely.
try to work toward the things that we have in common, which are quite a bit of things we have in common. And again, I would like to thank my guests for being here today, and I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in. So we're going to leave you with let's see, what shall I say? Unity and peace. Thank you.
Let me tell you about the spirit of the new wave. Let me tell you about something. Vision only brings us ruin and strife. Brothers, why can't we be united? Vision only brings us ruin and strife. Brothers, why can't we be united? So we say, unity in diversity.